tell us what Deutsche Bank did.
Deutsche Bank is kind of following the lead of some of the other European banks, the big U.S. operations, and it is basically restructuring those operations, changing the legal status of them, so that they're no longer bound in the same way that they would by the new Dodd-Frank law. So basically, it's restructuring its business in a way that will allow it to avoid having to pump in tens of billions of new capital.
So, David, this is something that's obviously caused a bit of controversy, at least among U.S. regulators. What's the latest on that? Are they accepting this, or what's next?
Well, the regulators, the primary regulator of Deutsche Bank and other banks as well, like Barclays, is the Federal Reserve. The Fed's approach to this is basically a hands-off approach. They don't have the right to kind of veto this. It's not up to them. It's up to the banks themselves. They certainly aren't objecting, but we're hearing some criticism from other kind of elements of the U.S. regulatory apparatus. And Sheila Bair, who until recently was the head of the FDIC, is very upset about this, I think you could say. And people view it as, or some critics, including Sheila Bair, view it as a pretty brazen attempt to just sidestep the intent of these rules.
To me, and someone call me crazy if you think I'm crazy, to me, I actually kind of read this as a good thing. If this bank unit, which is thinly capitalized, wasn't just really a straight-up bank, the way we think of banks, if they are no longer classified as a bank, if they no longer have to adhere to those rules, if something goes down, doesn't that kind of put them on the outskirts of what might be bailed out by the United States government? In my mind, that's a good thing.
Well, it might, but keep in mind that the entity here that we're talking about that's no longer technically classified as a bank is Deutsche Bank's investment banking arm in the U.S., which has, and so it's typical capital market stuff. It's also one of the biggest players in the derivatives market. So the ability for an entity like that, whether it's classified as a bank or classified as something else, the ability of that entity to inflict serious economic and financial damage on a country were it to get in trouble is pretty enormous. It's pretty hard to understate. So the mere fact that it's technically not a bank doesn't necessarily mean that it wouldn't get bailed out. The Fed and Deutsche Bank itself, I think, are relying on this argument that the U.S. operations of Deutsche Bank can rely as a source of strength on the parent company in Frankfurt, Germany. And there's a lot of merit to that. I mean, that the Deutsche Bank AG in Germany has, tens of billions, maybe hundreds of billions of euros of capital at its disposal. A lot of people, though, are skeptical, including Sheila Bair, are skeptical that if in a crunch, whether the German company would necessarily rush to the rescue of its troubled American subsidiary.
And so, David, have we seen this with other European banks with their U.S. operations? What's kind of the roadmap beforehand, and what have been the results since that?
We've seen this with at least one other bank, which is Barclays, which did this about a little more than a year ago with its U.S. operations. We haven't seen it. There are only a small handful, about I think 4 or 5 other sizable European banks with similar structures in the U.S. that might do this. So we haven't seen other examples of it. I think people are kind of watching closely to see what they do. And in terms of the effect of it, it's really hard to tell. There's not a tremendous amount of transparency from the Fed or from other regulators, and certainly not from the banks themselves, about how this actually impacts or affects the day-to-day operations or the day-to-day oversight of these banks.